I will never forget the day my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't an accident, or just any betrayal, it was the double blow no one expects, my wife and my best friend, together, while I was serving my country in the United States Army. My name is Ethan Harper, I'm 28 years old, and until a year ago, I thought my life made sense. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city that mixes quiet streets with modern skyscrapers, where everything seemed perfect. I had a career in the Army, a beautiful wife, Rachel, 27, and a best friend, Kyle, whom I'd known since high school. It was a closed, safe, reliable circle, or so I thought. I joined the Army after graduating college. It wasn't impulsive, I always felt I needed something bigger than myself, something that would give me purpose. Rachel supported me at first, she even drove me to the base to say goodbye when I was sent to extended training at Fort Bragg. She smiled, hugged me, and said, "I know you'll come back, and I'll be here waiting." I never imagined those words would be as false as her smile that night. The first time I felt something was wrong was just 2 months after being sent on a temporary deployment. Rachel started changing her routine. She used to message me every night, little photos of our pets, silly romantic memes, messages that made me smile amidst the cold and noise of the base. But those nights, the messages became scarce. And the ones I did get were cold, brief, devoid of affection. At first, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. After all, I was far away, and distance could strain a relationship. But something in my gut, something that rarely fails, told me something was off. One day, during a break in the base cafeteria, I received a strange email. It was from an unknown number, but the subject line had my full name, "Ethan, you need to see this." Attached was a video. My hand shook as I clicked it. I was not prepared for what I would see. The video showed Rachel in our living room, laughing and hugging someone I immediately recognized, Kyle, my best friend. Their faces were close, too close. My heart stopped. Every second of the video was a blow that tore my soul apart. There she was, the woman I planned to marry, the life I planned to build, with the man I considered a brother. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned against the table, feeling like I was drowning. I couldn't scream, I couldn't cry, I was trapped between helplessness and rage. A cold chill ran down my spine as the images etched themselves into my mind, laughter, kisses, touches. The betrayal was real, immortalized in pixels. I tried reaching out to Kyle first. I knew Rachel could make excuses, but he could not. I called him, my voice trembling. "Kyle." I couldn't finish. He let out a sigh, as if he'd been expecting this. "Ethan. I'm sorry," he said simply. That "I'm sorry" hurt more than any physical blow. I'll never forgive him, but at that moment, I felt part of me die. For the first time, I understood what it meant to feel your entire world collapse. In the following days, I returned from Fort Bragg on leave. I couldn't stay at the base, couldn't eat, sleep, or focus. I just kept thinking about how to confront Rachel. When I arrived home, everything was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavy, as if it knew betrayal was present. Rachel appeared at the door with her perfect smile, as if nothing had happened. "Ethan, what a surprise. I didn't expect you back so soon," she said, feigning excitement. I looked through her. Every word, every gesture, was a lie. "Rachel, why?" My voice was a thread, trembling but loaded with pain. She recoiled, confused, unable to hold my gaze. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep calm. I pulled up the video on my phone. I showed it to her, letting her see what I had already seen. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mix of anger and fear. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," she tried to explain, but every word fell like lies upon lies. "Rachel, what it looks like is exactly what it is," I said, taking a deep breath to keep from shouting. "With him, with Kyle." Silence filled the room. I could hear my heart shattering. But my mind was already plotting. A spark of vengeance ignited between the fury and heartbreak. I couldn't let this go unpunished. It wasn't just Rachel, Kyle needed to understand that actions have consequences. Over the following weeks, I acted as if everything were normal. I smiled in front of Rachel, talked to Kyle on social media, pretending ignorance. Every message from Rachel, every attempt by Kyle to justify themselves, only fueled the fire. Then one Friday, I decided it was time to dig deeper. I went to the house while they were out. I opened their emails, checked calls, messages. Every conversation confirmed what I already knew: my world had been hijacked by betrayal. But I discovered something else: Rachel had been planning to move out, taking everything that was mine, even our shared bank accounts. My fury transformed into cold resolve. I needed a plan. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation. I wasn't going to cry or beg. This required patience, intelligence, and precision. For months, I observed, I recorded, I waited. Every move Rachel and Kyle made was noted, every word heard. I learned to control my anger, to feign normalcy while my mind filled with strategies to expose them and dismantle what they had built on my trust. And then the day came. One Friday night, we hosted a dinner with friends, one of those seemingly innocent gatherings. Rachel and Kyle were there, smiling, carefree, confident nothing would happen. But they didn't know I'd also invited a professional photographer and a few trusted friends, ready to document every lie, every false gesture, every attempt to hide the truth. The night started calm, with laughter and conversation. But slowly, the tension thickened. I waited until they were comfortable, until their fake happiness reached its peak, and then I began to reveal everything: messages, videos, calls, photos, everything came to light. Rachel's smile disappeared, and Kyle's confidence cracked. Their attempts to deny the evidence were laughable, and everyone present could see the truth. I felt a mixture of release and power. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I breathed without the weight of deceit crushing me. But I knew this wasn't over. The real emotional confrontation, the one that would destroy what they had built on me, was yet to come. When the room fell quiet and the last of my evidence had been shown, the faces around the table blurred into one long wash of pity, shock, and curiosity. People muttered. Someone excused themselves. Kyle's jaw worked like a trapped animal trying to find an escape. Rachel's eyes were glassy with a kind of stunned disbelief that quickly curdled into shame. For the first time since I found that video, I felt something like clarity, an ugly, bright clarity that sharpened my thinking into a blade. I should have left then. I should have walked away with my dignity intact, signed divorce papers, closed accounts, and rebuilt. But the part of me that had learned discipline under the strictest regimes, counting rations, memorizing patrol routes, learning to wait, knew patience could be a weapon too. I'd seen inspiration and cowardice too often pass for triumph. That night, the thrill of being heard, of being believed, fed something dark. I felt the urge not just to punish, but to carefully dismantle everything they'd done, as if unpicking a sweater stitch by stitch. Over the next few days, the house turned into a courtroom of glances. Rachel blinked like a guilty animal caught on camera. Kyle alternated between hollow apologies and bursts of anger when he thought he could be alone with me. Friends I thought neutral shifted. Those who were close to me made space, physically and emotionally, as if my hurt were contagious. I learned from their distance, people do not only choose sides out of loyalty. They choose comfort. I began cataloging the harm: financial, social, emotional. I cataloged dates, times, messages, purchases. My training meant I knew the value of documentation. So when the late-night calls started, Rachel's voice cracking, Kyle's contrite messages, I answered with a level voice and a plan. They wanted bargaining, I wanted dismantlement. The first move was legal, precise, and antiseptic. A lawyer would have been the clean route, but by then I wanted the impact to be personal. I filed for temporary separation papers, initiating the divorce process myself. I removed access to our joint accounts with cold efficiency, documenting everything. I withdrew funds that were rightfully mine and placed holds where needed. It felt strange to do what felt like business against a marriage, but in my mind it was the right, necessary tactical strike: take away the resources that could be used to slip away and start anew on someone else's generosity. Rachel wept and begged when she discovered the locked accounts, accusing me of being cruel. Kyle's guilt turned to a clumsy attempt at the moral high ground: you're making this public. But I had already learned that truth is a public thing now. People had seen. We could not unsee. My lawyer gave me a terse list of options: protect assets, document infidelities, protect credit. Legalese was sterile, but effective. Money, I realized, was only the beginning. They had stolen intimacy, time, and trust, things that can't be itemized beneath a spreadsheet. So I moved to what I'd call psychological containment. I knew their weaknesses intimately. Kyle's ego was a living thing. He built his identity on being liked, being the funny guy, the dependable buddy. Rachel had always thrived on validation and social currency. She curates people the way some people curate photos for Instagram. Both of them had reputations they would guard, and reputations could be turned into leverage. I started small. Friends of ours, close ones, once loyal, received messages and private meetings. I did not lie. I was honest but careful, the truth without hyperbole. I handed over copies of the video to a few people who mattered most to their social circles. I didn't smear them online with dramatized accusations. I provided the facts and let the facts do the work. Rumors are pigs: you feed them facts and they become wolves. Slowly, invitations stopped coming for them. Group chats closed doors. Kyle's coworkers stopped inviting him to weekend barbecues. Rachel's women's group found reasons to schedule meetings when she couldn't attend. It was surgical. It wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. It was public erosion. People who once greeted them with warmth now offered stiff nods and awkward, watchful eyes. Even those who didn't know the whole story recoiled at the weight of what friends whispered. Social death felt slower than legal death, but no less effective. I remember the day Kyle texted, "Why are you doing this?" as if my actions had been chosen randomly. I wrote back, listing dates and times and the name of the restaurant where I had first met them together, the small things someone who'd lived with them would know. He sent a string of guilty emojis. He wanted forgiveness, or at least to negotiate a peace. I typed a single sentence, "You chose this." Then I blocked him. The block felt small, but it was a wall, simple, clean, final. People always romanticize confrontations, the shouting, the revelation, the trembling at the edge of the cliff. That's not how it was. Most of the power you ever have is in the quiet choices, who you tell, which accounts you close, how you prepare evidence for future proceedings. Those quiet moves are how you ensure the loud moments carry weight. Rachel, for her part, oscillated between rage and a kind of clinging sadness. She would sit across from me in the kitchen as if trying to decipher a map I had folded away, begging for closure or honesty. She wanted a conversation that would exculpate her by the alchemy of words. She didn't understand that she had already been judged, by herself and by the world. Her apologies became ritualistic, repetitive, measured, and hollow. They made my teeth ache. And yet, once in a while, late at night when the house felt empty and the clock ticked like a metronome to a life beat somewhere else, I felt grief so sharp it doubled me over. I missed the home-cooked dinners, the small rituals we'd built that weren't false, the way she used to hum when she cooked. Those memories were like photographs soaked in acid, beautiful and forever altered. I allowed myself those moments. They made the plan feel human, not monstrous. One night, under the pretense of returning something she'd left at my place, Rachel came by. She stood on the porch trembling like a storm-bent tree. I opened the door and let her in like a courtesy, not a second chance. Her presence made it worse, the closeness like an ache. She reached for my hand, and for a staggering half-minute I wanted to let everything fall apart and take her back, because I am, despite everything, human. Then I remembered the video, the way Kyle's hand lingered, the comfort in their laughter. I withdrew my hand gently and sat. She began to confess with that same museum of regret voice, the rehearsed cadence of someone who's practiced self-pity in the mirror. "I didn't mean for it to go as far as it did," she whispered. "It started when you were gone so long." He was there. He listened. He was there. I listened like a man taking inventory. I asked quiet, careful questions that didn't give her chances to redefine what she had done. I recorded none of it, I just listened to the confessions roll off her like rain. You learn, when you're trained to observe, to take in details, micro-expressions, a flicker of shame, the way hands twist when someone lies. Confessions are useless to the people making them. They're emotional litter you pick up to feed yourself later when you need to remind yourself that the person you loved has been human, terribly and concretely. Then I executed the piece that would hurt them in a place neither of them had thought to guard, their careers and their plans to move on. Kyle had been planning a promotion at work, something that would require references and trust. During a quiet conversation in the presence of one of his supervisors, a meeting I engineered by ensuring the supervisor heard my side of things first, I simply told the truth. I told it without rancor and without flourish. The supervisor listened with the bored, professional objectivity of someone who had heard workplace drama before. But facts are facts. Kyle's image was tethered to his integrity at work, and where that tether frayed, suspicion found purchase. A formal review was quietly called. It didn't ruin him overnight, but working relationships are fragile things. Reputation is what money is to houses, the foundation. When trust becomes a question, your house leaks. Rachel had been flirting with a move across state lines, a fresh start where a new community wouldn't know the past. I had friends, acquaintances and colleagues, across several cities. I reached out discreetly, told the story plainly, and watched doors close. People make reputations once and then guard them jealously. They do not like to risk their social capital on someone whose loyalty has been publicly compromised. There was one moment of perverse theater I will never forget. Rachel showed up at a charity event at a posh country club, something she'd done for years. That night, she wore a dress I once bought her for our anniversary, a dress that then seemed to bloom on her like a secret. I made a point to attend, no theatrics, no public spectacle. I walked into the event and let people approach me. Within the hour, conversation circled. Heads angled. People stepped away with that gait of those who carry a new, unspoken secret. When Rachel crossed the ballroom floor, hoping to smile for old acquaintances, the smiles she received were polite but thin. The playbook of societal redemption is long and complicated. Some people offered warm condolences, others, the kind words that were but salted with averted gazes. Her face crumpled like paper under your thumb. I stood at the bar counting her losses like coins, tasting how small and mundane the triumph felt. It pleased me and it didn't. Pleasure is a complicated currency when it comes at the cost of someone you once loved. But vengeance is not the same as cruelty. I never intended for them to be homeless. I never intended for children, if we had any, to be used as pawns. I wanted the truth to matter in the places where it actually impacts life: bank statements, job prospects, social standing. The rest I left to small, human consequences. People like truth, they sometimes exact payment through polite neglect. As the months passed, I kept a diary of sorts, not for the courts, but for me. It was a ledger of small hypocrisies I observed: Kyle's attempts at being friends with me again, his awkward texts, Rachel's new haircut that made her feel heroic, the way they tried to laugh off their fate on social media with a stitched-up normalcy that never fit. They performed normality like actors who had learned the lines of a play too late. Late winter arrived. The days shortened and the house felt quieter. I spent more hours alone, walking through neighborhoods I'd once loved with a duller eye. But ingrained in me was a strange new resilience. I had become someone who could hold two truths: the person who once loved her, and the person who would not be humiliated into silence. The plan had worked, subtly, inexorably. Friends who had turned into witnesses now testified without being asked. Employers who once trusted them now saw wavering reliability. Life closed doors. I had one last maneuver left, not to burn them, but to ensure their undoing was complete enough to be instructive. I wanted to show Rachel and Kyle that betrayal has consequences both public and private. So I prepared a dossier, a chronological, cleanly documented file of messages, dates, receipts, videos, and witness notes. I didn't make it public to shame them. There is a cruelty to public shaming I did not want to indulge, but I did file it with my attorney and with close friends who I trusted to act if necessary. It was a guarantee, an insurance policy that if they tried to gaslight or rewrite history, the truth could be produced in a way that could not be twisted. When I finally met Kyle in public for a talk, out of the need to close a circle, I did not want drama. We met at a neutral place, a small diner at noon, the lunch crowd a gray blur. He looked thinner, older at the eyes. His jokes were gone. He spoke with a humility that bordered on self-loathing. He tried to explain, and for the first time he did so without pretense. He admitted he had wanted to be loved, that he'd found in Rachel someone who listened, someone who made him feel less invisible. He apologized, not because the words came easy, but because the weight was too heavy for him to carry alone. Why? I asked at last, the word small but loaded. He shrugged. I don't know. It just happened. It's easy to say, it just happened, when you haven't had to watch someone pick up the pieces. It's easy to absolve yourself with the randomness of human frailty. But I had trained to see patterns, and his pattern was cowardice clothed in charm. I didn't punch him. I didn't yell. I listened. And then I said, calmly, you have to live with what you chose. Then I left. That night I slept for the first time in months without the caretaking weight of sleepless vigilance. I had not achieved catharsis, vengeance rarely gives you that. But I had crafted consequences that fit the crime, not violence, but loss, quiet, persistent loss. Social currency depleted, financial resources clipped, reputations frayed. I had removed their ability to casually move into a future together as if nothing had happened. I had reclaimed something that was mine, my self-respect and, importantly, my agency. Still, the story was not over. Revenge changes you, it clarifies things but also reveals other wounds. There were legal battles to come, property division, accounts, the small war of paperwork. There were nights I would find myself replaying the video, not out of a desire to hurt but as if to prove to myself this was real and that I had not imagined the betrayal. There was also the unexpected loneliness that followed triumph. When doors close, sometimes they seal in silence. Part of plan had been a way out for myself, to move, to start a new life where those ghosts couldn't find me, and yet I hesitated. I thought I wanted a dramatic departure, a fresh city, a different skyline. But over the months that followed, something quieter took hold. I realized that rebuilding wasn't about running. It was about learning to be present in the ruins, to plant seeds where the ground seemed burned. In the weeks before I filed the final divorce papers, I had one more encounter that would decide everything. Rachel came to me one cold evening with a folder in her hands. Her hair was shorter now, and there was a fatigue about her that looked like acceptance, not theatrical repentance. She said nothing for a long time and then merely placed the folder on the table. I found this, she said. I found all the old letters from when we were dating. I didn't know you kept them. Her voice was small. I opened the folder. Inside were handwritten notes I'd written years ago, an old, younger version of me who still believed love could be salvaged by promises and rituals. The ink was faded, but the sentiment was there, a messy, sincere testament to a time before betrayal. What do you want me to do with this? I asked. Keep them, she said. If you want them. I'm sorry. There's an odd intimacy in holding the physical remnants of a past that once pulsed with possibility. I kept the letters. I didn't choose them as a mockery, I chose them as evidence that I had once loved honestly. I wanted to remember that man as much as the man who had been betrayed. It was, in a way, an act of mercy toward myself. When I filed the final papers, it didn't feel like an act of vengeance so much as an admission. The marriage had been, for better and worse, a chapter that ended. The judge signed the decree with the indecipherable bureaucratic calm of someone who handles endings daily. The legal victory was a seal, a formal acknowledgement that the life I had known would not come back. That night, I walked out into the cool air and let the stars be indifferent witnesses. But endings breathe in the promise of continuation. I had shredded their safety net, yes, but life has a way of looping. People rebuild. Some will find forgiveness, some will find ruin. I wanted to be better than the man who sought just to see them burn. I wanted to be the man who had learned to resist the easy seduction of spectacle and choose, instead, to reclaim dignity in the quiet parts of life. Even so, there was one last piece of the puzzle, one final act of exposure I kept in reserve, a move to be played only if they tried to muddy the truth or rebuild a false narrative. I placed that final card in the hands of a trusted friend and an attorney with strict instructions: release it if and only if they attempted to gaslight me publicly. It was not cruelty, it was insurance. It was the moral equivalent of a locked trunk that you leave on someone's porch, empty, but if they open it, the world will see what they looked for. And with that, I closed my dossier and slid it into a drawer. The drawer clicked shut like a small, private verdict. The story was not yet complete. Vengeance ends, but aftermaths remain. There would be consequences I hadn't foreseen, rumors that morphed into something else, loved ones who would choose sides permanently, and nights where silence would gnaw like a tide. But having engineered the collapse of two lives that had once stood so close to mine, I felt something I hadn't expected, a sober gratitude for the clarity that comes after ruin. I was still human. I still had aches and cravings for what was gone. But I had also learned to rebuild intentionally, to armor not with bitterness but with boundaries. I was beginning to understand that the greatest revenge on betrayal is to live well, with integrity, and ironic mercy for someone who had spent months planning quiet ruin. Part 2 ends with that odd balance: a man who has won a battle but knows a war of restoration remains. The last scene of this chapter found me by the window at 2 a.m., sipping lukewarm coffee, tracing the skyline of Charlotte. The city's lights were steady, the indifferent, patient stars of urban life, and for the first time in a year, I felt the possibility of waking up to a life I might want again. When I first began planning revenge, I thought the hardest part would be making the world notice. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to live after everyone stopped looking. By the time Part 3 opens, the legal dust had settled into neat little files: property split, accounts separated, the final signatures that made the divorce official. Kyle's promotion never came, the review at his workplace lingered like a bruise for months. Rachel's move never happened, doors stayed closed where I had made sure they would. In the court of public opinion, the judgment had been swift and merciless enough that rebuilding would be slower, if even possible. But consequences spread like roots, not only toward them, but toward people who had been silent, friends who had watched, on one side or another, and had not acted. They drifted like loose buoys, uncertain and small. Some of them slid back to me over time, with quiet apologies that felt more like lifelines than confessions. Others never came back. That's the thing people forget: betrayal doesn't just break the relationship, it changes the network that kept your life upright. I had wanted a clean break. I had wanted justice measured in things you can present in court. The truth was messier. The way life responds to our choices isn't a ledger you can balance in one sitting. It takes repeating decisions, day after day, to rebuild the architecture of a life. For a while, I kept to patterns that felt safe. I rose early. I ran. I drilled myself with the same regimented discipline that had kept me moving through deployment. It helped. There is truth in the cadence of routine, it fills quiet spaces with purpose. Some nights, the house felt like an echo chamber. I would find myself speaking aloud to test my voice: "This is your life now." That little exercise helped me remember how to inhabit my own skin. There were moments, however, that the plan's aftertaste lasted. I remember a Sunday morning months after everything had shattered. I was making coffee and scrolling through social feeds by habit, a reflex to see what everyone else's ordinary looked like. There it was, a picture of Rachel, smiling on a beach she hadn't earned yet, captioned with some vague phrase about fresh starts. My stomach dropped. For a breathless instant I felt the old claws of fury and resentment sharpen. Then I realized something important: my anger had wanted to be reciprocal. It had wanted to see them hurt in measurable, public ways. I had given it that. But what had I not given myself? I had not given myself the permission to stop measuring my life by the damage they had received. That morning I turned off my phone and made a different kind of list, things I wanted to do that had nothing to do with retribution. Take a photography class. Visit my father in Ohio. Learn to cook something other than the microwave meals I'd subsisted on for months. The list was small and ridiculous. It felt like the first language of a life in recovery. In the background of that recovery was a quiet, final piece of the strategy one had not yet used. Months earlier, before filing everything, I had prepared a sealed packet, a chronological dossier of proof, video files, messages, witness statements, and a short, unsparing letter. I gave it to a trusted friend and my attorney with strict instructions: release it publicly only if either Rachel or Kyle attempted to rewrite what had happened, to gaslight me in public, or to slander me in a way that would infect the hard-won truth. It was a nuclear option, not because I wanted to obliterate them, but because I refused to have my memories turned into fiction. For months the packet remained unopened. That was, in and of itself, a kind of peace. The world didn't need it. The reason wasn't mercy, it was the slow, inevitable collapse of secrets under their own weight. People tend to avoid accomplices of pain when the cost becomes social currency. People who once smiled at them at parties now looked away with professional politeness. Yet there was one night, an ordinary Tuesday, that changed everything again. I was at a diner, elbows on Formica, nursing coffee that had seen brighter days. Kyle walked in. He seemed smaller than the man who'd been a tornado of charm. He had a new limp I'd not noticed before, an injured ankle from some reckless late-night run, or perhaps an attempt at distraction. He sat down across from me without the usual nervous humor. For the first time, he looked me in the eyes without trying to find the words that would smooth them over. "I've been sober 3 months," he said, oddly proud. "I'm trying to fix things." I watched his hands. They shook, but not in the way they had months earlier. Then it had been the tremor of a man who knows he's lost social capital. This was something else, a tremor made of consequence, of guilt, and maybe, finally, remorse. "You can choose to fix things," I said. "Or you can choose to live with what you did." He swallowed, and the diner hummed around us like indifferent fate. He asked if I hated him. The question was raw in its smallness. "I don't know if hate's the right word," I replied. "It's exhaustion. It's disappointment. It's a complicated weight I carry. But I don't want your redemption to be something I own. Make it for you." He nodded. That was the end of that conversation, quiet, unsatisfactory, and oddly human. We parted without the fireworks of closure I'd imagined in my darker nights. Sometimes there is no climactic moment in real life, just small acts of accountability that don't make for viral videos. Rachel's path was less tidy. She had the kind of charm that, before everything, could have smoothed her way back into any social circle. After everything, charm became only one more thin veneer. She tried therapy for a while, then moved through a few relationships that seemed more hurried than sincere. She attempted to explain herself on a podcast I never listened to, offering the usual litany of human failure. I wasn't myself, and it landed like paper against stone. Listening to her voice on someone else's platform made me feel faintly sick, like seeing a photograph of a wound on another's body. But the wound was already mine. We met once after the divorce, by accident at first, then by what her friend called a necessary conversation. She wanted closure. I gave her a few hours of my attention in a small cafe. She cried and talked about loneliness and how my absence had opened a space she'd filled with the wrong kind of company. She was honest and partially self-aware, but honesty is not redemption. It is merely a step. She asked for forgiveness. There are moments in life when you can feel your own heart boil and cool at the same time. I let forgiveness be what it needed to be, not absolution for her actions, but a release for myself. "Why did you do it?" she asked, voice frayed. "It doesn't matter why now," I said. "It matters what you become after." That answer irritated her. She wanted more, the kind of detail that would make her the tragic protagonist and me the moral compass. I refused the invitation into melodrama. We left as two people who had been anonymous to each other for some time, trailing the smell of coffee like a map to the past. One of the cruel ironies I discovered was the social pity economy. People often take the easier side. They either point at the betrayer and whisper or keep their distance and whisper not to them. That economy turns the betrayed into a public project. For a while, I carried the burden of other people's expectations, friends who wanted me to be visibly wrecked so they could play the compassionate role. I learned to reject being curated as a spectacle. I didn't get to choose the way the story had been told about me, but I could choose how to be present now. I started volunteering with a veterans outreach group, partly because it reminded me of a time before Rachel and Kyle, when my identity had been simpler, and partly because it filled an emptier need I hadn't admitted to: companionship without strings. The work was small: coffee for long nights, rides to medical appointments, paperwork help. The men and women I met had their own stories of loss and repair. They didn't need mine to be a viral headline. They needed me to be steady. That steadiness taught me to be human again. I would spend Saturdays in the community center, listening, helping, and sometimes simply being present while others shared the quiet weight of their lives. It was there, in the mundane generosity of time, that I began to feel a different kind of reclamation. Love, when it returns, is rarely dramatic. It arrives in small, cautious gestures: a book left at your door, a shared recipe, a text that reads, "Made too much, want some?" Months after the divorce, a woman named Zoe walked into my life. She wasn't thunderclap romance. She was a friend of a friend from the outreach group, a nurse who had moved to Charlotte from Boston. She laughed at things I said that weren't clever and listened when I told stories that weren't polished. There was no sudden fireworks, just slow recognition. She liked the smell of the coffee I burned in the mornings and brought me a better brew. She knew nothing of the viral scandal that had once been my life. When she learned, she asked a few gentle questions, and then she left it at that. She didn't need to curate me, she wanted to be in my life for whatever came next. That felt revolutionary. Relationship after a public trauma is delicate. I told Zoe early on that my past was a jagged place. She said she'd walk slowly if I allowed it. She did. So I did something scary: I let someone new see the more tender parts of me. I told her about deployment, the quiet nights of fear, the small frustrations of life that built up into a complicated shape. I told her about the video, the one that had crumpled me, and watched for the flash of judgment. There was none. In its place was compassion, measured and honest. People say that revenge isolates you. They're right, but it's equally true that recovery chooses its companions. There were still nights when I replayed the betrayal. Those images are stubborn. That's the thing with trauma: you can't cancel the memory file, but you can decide how often you play it. I learned to interrupt the playback, call a friend, get on a run, photograph something beautiful. Eventually the images themselves lost their power. They became reference points rather than the script of my life. As the months turned into a year, a curious thing happened. News cycles moved on. Friends who had turned away came back with apologies. Some were sincere, others perfunctory, mostly the ones who didn't want drama but wanted to be seen doing the right thing. That's acceptable. Human beings are messy and sometimes return to the places they once occupied. I let some back in, others I kept out. The threshold was not revenge-based, it was prudent. I also found that revenge had changed me in unexpected ways. I had set out to prove something, to punish those who pierced my trust. In the process, I had become someone comfortable with orchestrated outcomes. That can be useful if you direct it at goals that heal. It can be corrosive if you keep feeding it with resentment. I had to be deliberate. So I turned that strategic part of myself to constructive ends: career goals, physical health, relationships that felt reciprocal and honest. One day I received a message from a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in months. It was simple: "Kyle's moving to Portland. He says he's starting over." I pictured him with fewer friends and a slower social life. A part of me wanted to deliver the dossier personally just to watch him squirm. Another part, the larger part, recognized that a man learning to carry his choices is more terrifying and more true than any public humiliation. I typed back, "Tell him I hope he learns." Revenge, I realized, can be a teacher if you let it. It sharpens you, but it can also narrow you. So I chose to let it educate me, not define me. I used the lessons I'd learned in the art of strategic thinking, planning, patience, timing, to build a life I wanted, not to orchestrate another person's ruin. Years later, I stood in a small art gallery in Charlotte, watching a friend's photography show. One of my pictures, an image of a weathered porch bathed in late afternoon light, hung on the wall. Seeing a photograph of something ordinary made from pain feel suddenly holy. I felt small and large at the same time. Zoe squeezed my hand and, for a moment, the city lights outside were not indifferent but inviting. On one lazy autumn evening, we visited Fort Bragg, not because I needed to relive anything, but because my history there was complicated and incomplete. I walked past the base gates, a civilian now, and felt a strange kind of gratitude. Service had taught me many things: discipline, courage, the value of quiet duty. The betrayal had taught me different lessons: boundaries, presence, the cost of misplaced trust. Both had carved who I had become. If there's a last scene to this story, it isn't in a courtroom or on a social feed. It's in the slow, steady acts that create a life worth living: waking up, making perfect coffee, returning a borrowed book, holding hands while walking through the city, teaching a new recruit at a veteran outreach event how to fill out a complicated form. The acts are small, but they add up. They are the slow accumulation of repair. On a chilly December night, a year and some months after the video that had undone me was first sent, I sat on my back porch and watched the neighbors string lights along their eaves. The world moved on, beautifully and indifferent. I thought of Rachel and Kyle, of what they'd lost and, perhaps, of what they would someday find in sobriety and humility. I thought of the dossier I'd kept in a drawer and then had finally shredded, no public proof required anymore. I tossed the remaining pieces into the trash and watched them curl like modest flags. I am not a perfect man. I am not a moral exemplar. I plotted revenge and carried it out. I took satisfaction in consequences meted to those who betrayed me. But revenge does not crown you. It clears a space, a kind of bare patch in the garden, and then the real work is to plant something new there. I planted patience, small acts of courage, and the willingness to be seen again without armor. What I leave behind of that life is a cautionary tale. Love without boundaries can be a dangerous thing, friends can become traitors, the things you think define you can be lost in a single act. But what I have taken forward, what I built after the ruins, is the steadiness of a man who learned that dignity is not given, it is made. It is not earned by spectacle, it is earned by the steady courage of showing up again for yourself. In closing, if this story ever reaches you, if you are the wounded, read this and know, the best revenge is not to make others kneel, but to stand up and live well. If you are the betrayer, know that the easiest road is a short one, and the repair of what you broke will take longer than you imagine. And if you are a bystander, remember your role is heavier than praise or silence. What you do in those moments can define someone's life in ways you never anticipated. I still think of the early letters I kept in that folder sometimes. I opened them and read the handwriting of a younger man who wanted to be brave enough for love. That man did brave things and foolish things. He hurt and was hurt. He survived. He is not the same, he is wiser, a little softer around the edges, less inclined to public spectacle and more inclined to small truths. So this is the end of the story, not a tidy cinematic revenge with flames and dramatic reckonings, but a messy, honest life, one that chose healing over endless retaliation. I moved on. I loved again. I forgave, in small doses, not to absolve them, but to free myself. And in that freedom, I found a peace that never went viral but felt like landing on solid ground.